Since my divorce, it has been 8 years between my daughter and me. She blocked me and refused to listen to my side of the story. However, she recently contacted me intending to get her inheritance. When I turned 54, I divorced my wife, who was 48. At that time, my daughter was a grown woman of 28 years of age. She stopped all contact, immediately choosing her mother's side, showing no interest in my feelings. My divorce has been almost a decade now, and it took me a long time to accept it. I came out and accepted my new life. My ex-wife tried to completely ruin my reputation, but mostly because I genuinely loved my daughter and was completely cut off from her life. It was a lot harder than it may have seemed because she was already an adult. I had no way to be there for her unless she wished to be, and she made her own choices, completely ignoring my point of view. Many years passed and I had time to adjust to my new circumstances, focusing on caring for my mum, who had Alzheimer's, and my career. There was a temporary relationship, but after the divorce, I couldn't fully trust another person. That's how my life went for almost a decade. And my daughter recently contacted me. After such a long time, I felt a kind of joy and thought that she had finally come to her senses and realized that the divorce was not just due to my actions. It was comforting, especially after my mum had died and I was dealing with my grief alone. My daughter reached out to me a few months after my grandmother's death. She called from an unfamiliar number and I recognized her voice, which had changed over the years. I was completely shocked by this call. She told me that she had found out about her grandmother's death through Facebook and decided to check how I was treated. My heart squeezed to know that she had been following my life on the internet, but it was nice of her. I thanked her for calling and assured her that I was fine. I'd always missed her. We spent a lot of time talking and she said she wanted to meet me in person, not just over the phone. I immediately agreed and we arranged to meet at my house over the weekend. I was excited to meet her after all these years, which is why I wrote this post to share my excitement with anyone who might read this. Hopefully we can rebuild our relationship or at least start over and close the gap in our dating. I wanted to make her dinner as she has always loved my meals. I was nervous and excited when I opened the door and saw her. After all these years, she had changed so much that I didn't even immediately recognize her. We talked, and although it was awkward at first, we were able to open up to each other. She talked about her life and work, and I shared my experiences after my divorce. We finally dared to discuss the past and the problems that had arisen. She apologized for never listening to my version of events, choosing to side with her mother, and said that her mother had misrepresented my reputation. Thankfully, she now regrets her actions and admits her mistakes before she was too young to understand and had to be manipulated. We continued talking, and things were going well until she finally told me why she had decided to come to me after all these years. She looked nervous, and then she said what she might have been thinking all these years. She wanted to be with me. It was a moment of happiness for both of us. She reported that she had actually been following me through Facebook, and when she learned of her grandmother's death, she assumed that the lawyers would make contact with her regarding the inheritance. However, when no one did, she decided to contact me personally. She said that she wanted to give me some time and space to grieve, but that she had recently got engaged, and I would benefit greatly from the money to help organize the wedding reception. The feeling was like a punch in the face. Honestly, I thought after all these years my prayers had been answered and I could rebuild my family, but it turns out that she never cared about me in the first place, and all these actions were just a way to achieve an inheritance. The funny thing about all of this is that even she is not a legitimate heir, and if she wasn't such an obnoxious daughter, in my opinion, I would probably bequeath her share, if not all of it. I've never been interested in money, to be honest. I live in my own home and have no expensive hobbies, mostly buying clothes with a purpose. Even if inheritance wasn't an issue in the first place, I wouldn't be opposed to helping her with the wedding. If she just reached out to me instead of trying to take advantage of my wealth, I would be willing to support her. All I'm worried about is the inheritance. All of this was swirling around in my head, but at the same time I somehow kept my composure and asked her what she really wanted. She took a very defensive stance and said that the inheritance was only secondary, and her real goal was to get in touch with me, and she would never forgive herself if she didn't achieve her goal. When her grandmother was alive, she said she wished she had been able to help all those years ago, but never found the courage to do so because she thought I would never forgive her for throwing me out without explanation and that she was also driven by her mum. I could see it in the frightened look on her face. It told me that she was just trying to smooth things over so that I could forgive her. And I wondered if she was being sincere, or if it was all about money from the start. I asked her how she knew about the inheritance, and she told me that a couple of years ago she had been visiting my deceased mother, who had informed her of her wish to leave her whatever was left of my father, who had died many years ago as she was his only granddaughter in the family. I don't have any siblings, and my marriage was strong at this point, so I can see why my mother would inform my daughter. I mean, if the divorce hadn't happened or my daughter hadn't stopped communicating with me for years after the divorce, the money would have been there for her, as I mentioned. But the thought that she only cared about money and that she was giving me false hopes just destroyed me. I was left devastated, but I did my best not to show her my feelings. I realized that the only way to test my daughter's sincerity would be to tell her that there was no inheritance money and see how she reacted. I asked her how much she expected from the inheritance, and she suggested a pretty decent amount, but I told her that it was all planned and I was very sorry to disappoint her. But her grandmother actually left everything to me years ago and I was going to use the money to start my business. Therefore, I can't help her. I offered to help organize her wedding using my own money, offering a few thousand for wedding expenses. The look of disappointment on her face confirmed my worst fears. She said she appreciated my offer, but since she is the only grandchild who deserves at least a portion of the inheritance since it is her grandmother's money, she would not be able to accept my help. I also told her that I would like to help her, but my decision was final and there was nothing more I could do for her if she was not satisfied with the money I was offering. Her face turned completely red and she became visibly angry. She told me to reconsider my decision once more, but I repeated that I would remain true to my principles. It was then that she revealed her true nature and said something that only confirmed all my doubts about her true intentions. She told me that she should have known that I would always be selfish, and her mum was sure I would be alone in life. I looked at her with barely concealed disgust. Her words were hurtful, but at the same time I had expected this turn of events. I just laughed back. I walked up to her and said right to her face that if she hadn't blocked me years ago, she would have received my message about her grandmother and probably received most, if not all, of the inheritance. My goal was to cause her complete confusion and question what I meant. I suggested she unblock me on her old number so I could forward her all the messages she might never get. And she did. I forwarded all the messages begging her to listen to me and even informed her of her grandmother's Alzheimer's diagnosis. We wanted them to meet before she forgot about her. Only a grandson wanted that. And it was all true, as in the beginning about her illness. My mum often talked about my daughter and asked to see her. I remember how it tore at my heart that I could not fulfill that wish. And now, this ungrateful, cruel child has the nerve to ask for an inheritance. To my daughter's credit, I admit that she felt ashamed after reading all those messages, to which she apologized to me, but said that once she read all those messages, it was clear that her grandmother wanted her to get her share of the inheritance, and it was unfair of me to penalize her. She said that she was young and didn't know any better during the divorce, or she would have acted differently. She also told me that she genuinely wants to repair our relationship, and if I choose to be selfish, now she will not feel comfortable continuing our relationship. I told her that if money is what makes or breaks it for her, it might be better if we don't have a relationship at all. I wanted to believe her when she was talking all this crap about repairing our relationship. I told her I would consider giving our relationship another chance. But the inheritance issue became closed, and she looked at me with pure hatred and left the house. I didn't try to stop her and haven't spoken to her since. I spoke to some of my friends, most of whom agreed with me that I did the right thing. But one close friend said that as the money didn't matter to me, I should just forget about it and let my daughter take any of the inheritance if that was what mattered to her. It could mean that I should have a family in my life and I don't. I agree with that, but ever since he said it, I can't get it out of my head. I have to give my daughter part of my inheritance. Hi, this is new information about inheritance. Please leave comments to share your opinion and offer your perspective. Thank you so much for the advice and opinions that have given me a new perspective. Need to start by answering the most frequently asked question about what happened during my divorce. I haven't talked about it in years, but I think now is the time to do so. So my wife and I got married 23 years ago, and who would have thought after all these years she was able to betray me? I really didn't want to go into details, but I found out that she had been cheating on me with several men for quite some time. When I finally found out the truth, it was a huge shock to me. I didn't know how to confront her, so I started abusing alcohol and neglected myself. Almost ruined my life. I often had arguments with her, and she used this against me to manipulate my daughter and pull her to her side. After almost a year of living like this, we finally separated. My ex-wife was a journalist, and she used her influence to try and ruin my reputation. After the divorce, it took me a long time to drink and get back to a normal life. As I mentioned, my daughter completely abandoned me. I admit it. When I found out about my ex-wife's affairs, I was kind of distracted from everything related to raising my daughter. Even after the divorce, and for a year or so after that, I was almost always an absent father and not around my daughter. But one day I quit drinking and began to rebuild my life. The first thing I had to do was to approach her and apologize, but she refused to listen to me and blocked me everywhere. I thought I would give her time, that she would come round. But it's been 8 years now and our relationship is only getting worse. So another big question about my mum's inheritance. Technically the money was inherited from my dad, my grandparents. They were both doctors and had purchased properties all over the city during their careers. Most of the properties were rented out, which made my father a lot of money. He passed away when I was 21 and left everything to my mother. It was all left in her name as real estate. During my marriage and for a few years after the divorce, while my mum was alive, everything remained in her name. After my mum died, I completely transferred all the structures I received into my name. My wife was left without any property claims in the divorce except for alimony. However, a few years ago, I remarried as my mum owned everything then. We are doing well. My daughter is not even close to owning everything she knows. Sure, her grandmother was a landowner and I have a few assets, but I've never touched that money. The money earned from my previous business was more than enough for a quiet life. I hope I have answered all the questions as well. My daughter didn't even contact me after that night, and I doubt she will. It was just a show for the inheritance, and now that it's gone, I don't expect to see her around anymore. Honestly, I'm not too upset about it, but I know not to expect too much from people, regardless of their past connections. Here's what I think. Thank you all for your support. I appreciate it. Maybe it's time to put all this behind me and maybe start dating again and looking for new company instead of waiting for ghosts from my past. It's been a whole week since the last update, and I thought it would be the last. But it seems that things in life don't go as you plan. Anyway, I had just got back from work and was thinking about meeting a couple of friends when someone rang the doorbell. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I opened the door nonetheless. And there, standing there like a nightmare, was her. She had changed her hair and lost a little weight, which took a couple of seconds for me to recognize her. But it's very hard to forget someone you've been with for decades. Seeing her was a real shock, to say the least. I didn't know what to say, just stood there. Then she awkwardly asked if I had time to talk about some things. I was hesitant, but I didn't want her standing on the doorstep, so I just invited her inside. It was very awkward, but imagine we talked about all that. She said that she realized it was a bit strange, but there were some things she felt she had to tell me about. I asked her to go on, and she said that our daughter had approached her and told her about the inheritance. I think I saw this coming. Why she needed to inform me after all these years, I don't know. Anyway, she said that she realized that the divorce was entirely my fault, and that she had gone much further than she should have to try to get the inheritance. I just laughed at that, but she ignored my response. Then she said that I shouldn't punish my daughter for what happened between us. She said the same thing that my daughter said, that she was very young at the time of the divorce and how I couldn't judge her for choosing her mother over me. I interrupted her at this point and told her that I had no resentment towards anyone else, and even if I held any negative feeling, it would not be directed at her daughter. I told her that I was offended by the realization that after all these years, she was only thinking of contacting her father because there was an opportunity to get some money. I told her the same thing I told my daughter, that if she had had the conscience to try to reconnect earlier, she would have done it just for the inheritance. She ended up getting my ex-wife's inheritance. She tried to give some sort of explanation, but I told her that my decision was final, and if they're just going to go around talking about it, they're wasting their time. I told her I had plans, and if they had nothing else to discuss, she should probably leave. She nodded and apologized for bothering me, even though I was uncomfortable. I told her it wasn't necessary, and she left. After she left, I just sat there and couldn't believe my eyes. I never expected to see her again. Talking alone in my house was strange and brought up a lot of old memories that I would rather forget. I thought about seeing my friends and tried to forget about it all. That's how, yes, it happened, and I needed to share it with all of you. This afternoon I was at work when I got a phone call from my daughter. I thought about not picking up the phone, but out of curiosity I took her call, and she immediately said that if it had to do with an inheritance, she really didn't think we should talk about it. Turns out she had something else she wanted to talk about and asked me to meet with her. She said she had been thinking about what had happened for a long time and felt she owed me an apology. She realized that I had every reason to be disappointed, but if I was willing to forgive and give our relationship another chance, she would be happy to see me at her wedding. I was left very puzzled. Well, whatever happens, I have to look around and make a decision. But I'll talk about that in the next update.